Hello, everybody. I'm sorry again that I couldn't come to you live, so I kind of recorded this, going to set it to premiere um, at the normal stream time because I'm trying to maintain that stream time, but um, I don't know. I want to make sure that I'm putting these videos out regularly, but sometimes things come up, and 2 weeks in a row things came up. So hopefully next week. I don't see why I wouldn't be able to be live again next week, as far as I know. As far as I know, I'll be live again. But I wanted to really quick check in with three things. Three things that I think could happen. And I'm not guaranteeing any of them. I can't predict the future. I could be totally wrong on all three. And honestly, I hope I am. I honestly hope I'm wrong on all three. Um, that the things that could happen that could fundamentally shift how you and I live our lives and how, things, I mean, just fundamental changes and crises. They're crises. Like if these things happen, if any of these things happen, or if all of these three things happen, um, we could see some very serious problems. So, problem number one. Problem number one is a potential stock market crash. I've been talking about GameStop. If you go onto my blog and you go under GME and, like all of that, um, I've been talking about GameStop and that stock situation. But essentially, there's a possibility through that we could see a stock market crash as these financial institutions, um, when they are forced to cover their positions and everything. And I honestly, at first, I was like, why are they doing this? Why are they digging themselves in a deeper hole? There's no way that they can get out of this. Part of what I've come to the conclusion of is that they realized they couldn't get out already. They were already in too deep a hole. So now they're digging deeper to the point where the government has to intervene. Just like 2008, the government had to intervene um, because they were too big to fail. The banks. But this isn't just banks. This is hedge funds, financial institutions, banks, and ultimately the government. Because it's one of those things where if this hedge fund can't fulfill their obligation, they go bankrupt and their liabilities go to whoever's backing them, and that goes to whoever's backing them, and eventually you end up with the Federal Reserve or the federal government, either way. Um, and then you end up with money printer go burr, to a really just unimaginable potential level. And that's where you end up with the stock market crash and possibly hyperinflation and all that. We're already seeing huge food inflation. There's been some stories on that. You may have noticed that your grocery bill is higher than it was a few months ago for the same kinds of food, for the same more or less amount of food. I definitely noticed it. It was a gradual thing. I didn't realize it at first because, at first I just thought it was like a lifestyle inflation. I thought I was spending more money. I thought I was buying more expensive stuff. Not really. I'm really buying about the same things. Um, because I had to sit and analyze it. I'm like, am I buying stuff that's more expensive? Is there a reason that my grocery bill is higher? And then I see these articles about food inflation. I'm like, okay, well that would do it. Um, so we have a crash, a stock market crash. The next one is what I've talked about before. I talked about it 2 weeks ago. Is a power grid failure, and a power grid failure plus a supply chain attack in coordination with the what the World Economic Forum and the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation and all of them are practicing for this summer. They're going to be preparing for a possible targeted supply chain attack, which means you too should be preparing for a possible targeted supply chain attack. If they're preparing for it, so should you. So those are both significant things. And then, and I would even go so far as to say that it might be beyond, we talk about, you know, a supply chain attack and how World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, people like that who have these kind of globalist, global control, population control kind of ideas, um, you know, not going to say that they're going to cause it, but they may see things coming and choose not to prevent them, or choose to manipulate things in a certain way so that it goes the way they want it to. But you look at how World Economic Forum and WHO and the UN are all have very heavily influenced by China. And China's really pushing. Just there's a lot of stuff where they really seem to be going this imperialist route, and I don't think it's good for us. So yeah, I think that there's some real problems there. So there's that. There's a supply chain attack, and for that, what that means is the literally the supply chain goes down. Literally, you go to the grocery store and there's no food on the shelves because nothing's being delivered, or there's very little food on the shelves because the only things being delivered are things that are local. Um, or or you end up with extremely high prices that you can't afford, and that can actually tie in with the stock market crash and the hyperinflation if the money printer goes burr. So you can have these things kind of cascade into each other. Where if we have a stock market crash over here and some hyperinflation from the money printer, and then we have a supply chain attack, that's where you could see this kind of like snowball effect from these things. And I also do think that we're going to see some. The third thing is I do think we're going to see another some kind of federal national level lockdowns. Now, I don't know if it'll be from COVID. It could be from COVID, um, for sure. Like they're definitely discussing all the variants and all the things. And then you have the media narrative surrounding Texas and Mississippi reopening. I do want to clarify Texas is not reopen 100% like Greg Abbott likes to say. His executive order doesn't do that. His executive order rescinds most of his prior orders, does not acknowledge that those orders were wrong, and does not do anything to stop them from happening again. They're based on the numbers, which means that at any time, if the numbers go up, like the numbers of cases go up or whatever, he could just lock everybody down again. Versus Florida, where they said like, okay, we're lifting this and we're not doing this again. Like that's the part that I'm looking for that says, okay, yes, we are out of the woods here. But as long as it's still kind of like, well, as long as the numbers stay good, that's not a real reopening. And businesses should I want businesses to reopen, but you should be prepared that he could try to close things down again and have a plan for either resisting that by staying open or have some kind of plan as far as being able to recoup any losses from that. So anyway, so I think we could see another lockdown either, but here's the thing is I think either from the virus or they're pushing this idea of climate change lockdowns because there was this like, oh, hey, look, our carbon levels went down. Maybe we should do this every 2 years. And there's one article that suggested that we would have to do a lockdown every 2 years in order to um, cooperate with the Paris Climate Accords. Those Paris Climate Accords, everybody's like, yay, we're going to be back in the Paris Climate Accords. We're going to save the planet. Basically, the levels that those require would essentially force us to, I mean, the way that we would achieve that is to lock down again every 2 years, like we just did. So, I don't know if that'll happen just yet or if that's a down the line kind of thing, but and I definitely think they're pushing the narrative of the variants. The media narrative around Texas and Mississippi is this idea that like, oh man, we were so close. That's what they're telling us. They're like, we were so close, and you went and ruined it. And they're going to blame states that were open or that reopened because they're not even necessarily going to blame. I don't think they can blame like Florida or North Dakota or anything like that because they were open the whole time or most of the time, and so what you gonna do? How are you gonna blame them? So I think that I do think that they're gonna push this. 'Cause see, in 2020, we had this virus, we had this idea of locking down and shutting down the economy. And there was discussion. There were people who were saying, "Hey, no, we shouldn't do that." And there were some people saying, "You know what? Maybe a pause of a couple of weeks. That's fine." But the federal government never came and said you must shut down, right? The federal government did not come and say you may not operate your business. They could. Under Trump knew that he was never going to get all the governors to cooperate. like, and he knew that forcing the issue was not going to work. Biden may take a different tactic, or whoever is making these decisions for Biden, because it's not Biden making these decisions. He doesn't even know if he's supposed to take questions or not. So I think that we could see some kind of federal lockdown, and the question is always, of course, how is that enforced? You do a federal lockdown. How do you enforce that? Do you send federal law enforcement in? What I think is that if there was a federal lockdown, if Biden came and said you must lock down, there would certainly be resistance, but I think a large portion of people would still self-enforce. And I know people are saying, well, no, we're people are done with this. People are so sick and tired of it. If the media frames it the right way, there will be. Here's the problem. You have, on the one hand, people who believe the media narrative and believe that all the lockdowns and mask mandates and all of it, that they're all necessary. You have people who believe it. And I'm always surprised at how many people really do. And I actually talk to people who are not involved in politics, because like I kind of, I'd have my kind of circle of people that I normally talk to. When I talk to people outside of that circle, I realize just how much they believe this. Like they're not questioning. Like there's so many people that are not questioning the media narrative on this, on COVID or on any of it. Like they still buy it. It's not, you would expect. Everybody's like, all right, we're all done. And there's a lot of people who are, but there's so many who aren't. And they're the ones who are double masking, right? They're the ones who are wearing masks when they don't have to, when there is no mandate. They're the ones wearing masks in their cars. And it's sad. They're the ones putting masks on their children. There was a whole story about parents isolating their children. Like, oh, there's a COVID case at their school, and the advice was to lock them up in their room. Make sure they have access to a bathroom, but otherwise, like, they have to stay in their room, which is a punishment for a lot of kids. Like that's what happens when you're in trouble, and being kind of quarantined or isolated in your room for. Anyway, their parents, they did this, right? And there were some who talked about it on social media, but how many more just did it and didn't post about it because they didn't. They... So my point is, we don't. I don't know that we have the mass resistance yet. I think it's gonna still come. I think those of us who are aware that this is nonsense. I think we're still the early group. I don't think it's hit critical mass yet. I think it could. But so that's what you could see is at least an attempt at a federal lockdown. Because here's the thing: is if by executive order or even by Congress. I mean, honestly, I think with the control that Congress has right now, control that the Democrats have over Congress right now, if they really wanted to, I'm sure they could pass a COVID lockdown bill a lot faster than they can pass a COVID relief bill. Just watch. Or they'll tie the lockdowns to the relief, and it'll be things like, oh, you only get the relief if your state locks down, or you only get the relief if for like businesses only get the relief if they're not open, right? Like you only get the yeah, that's what they could do, and if they control the purse strings, they control the people, and that's those are the directions they could go. But even literally, if Biden says, all right, it is now a crime, is now illegal, I mean, here's the thing: Trump banned bump stocks through executive order because he redefined them as whatever, and people stopped selling bump stocks. So as much as I would love to have a bump stock, I can't go to a gun store and buy a bump stock because they are now illegal. Now, if my local gun store decided to sell bump stocks, is is the federal government or is the ATF going to show up and probably yeah, the ATF's pretty. I mean, they're pretty good at that kind of stuff. They're pretty good at showing up and enforcing stupid rules and killing people and dogs in the process. But anyway, um, so that's the thing is, can they enforce it? No, not really. But people will self-enforce. Nobody wants to be in violation of federal law or in violation of federal rules or or at risk of getting in trouble. Nobody wants that. So while, yeah, it's like, can they really shut us all down? They can try. And how many people will just go along with it? Most. Most. And most states will go along with it. If Biden said you need to shut down or you're not getting whatever federal funding, most states would just shut down. Probably Texas would too, because our governor has shown that he has no guts whatsoever. He has no willingness to stand up for Texas. He's only even doing the reopening stuff now. It's all conditional. It's all conditional on the numbers. None of it is an acknowledgement that he was wrong in the first place. And it's first of all, it's not a full reopening. Okay, it's schools are still dystopian nightmares. It's still schools are still masks and distancing and spraying everything and temperature checks when you walk in the door, right? Like my students, they walk in the morning, they get a temperature, they get a forehead scan on their way in. Then they go, and they have to wear their mask, and they have to, and the gaiters are not acceptable. You can't wear a gaiter. Those aren't enough. Can't just wear a face shield. You have to have a mask underneath it. You can wear a mask and a face shield if you want, if you really want. And then they come to my classroom and they're supposed to sanitize their hands on the way in. I don't really make them. Sanitizer is there. It's there. It's there. Um, and they come in and they sit down and they all have to be 6 feet apart. They all have to be kind of like facing and like not, kind of staggered so they're not like directly in front of each other. Um, and then they're on their computers on their they've got their computer up. I'm on my computer because I've got maybe 4 or 5 students in the classroom and 20 students at home, so I have to teach to the ones at home. And this we're still operating like this, and we will still be. They let us know very quickly that we would not be changing the way we operate at all based on Governor Abbott's updated orders. So my point is that we are not out of the woods yet on this lockdown thing, and I honestly think that we're going to get a clamp down soon. Soon, honestly. I think they're setting the stage for late March, early April. Could be later, could happen, and could not happen at all. But if you have businesses that just reopened and then the federal government says you must close, and then, okay, maybe we have a lawsuit that goes to the Supreme Court. But first of all, we've seen that our Supreme Court does not have the guts that we thought they would. Based on the people that Trump picked, we thought, okay, these are good people. They're principled. They'll be fine. No, we haven't seen that. Or we've seen that some of them are, but not enough of them to really make the difference. So, and then also Biden's probably going to pack the court at some point. So, yeah, you can sue and you can go to the Supreme Court and say, yeah, they shouldn't have done this. And the Supreme Court can say, meh, we won't take the case. Well, it's a pandemic. They could say all kinds of things. You could have a Supreme Court that like affirms the power to lock down the economy in the event of an emergency. We could see that happen, right? So I want people to think through like the federal government says you must shut down. Do you have a plan for staying open? Um, what are you going to do? And all these businesses that just reopened, if they all of a sudden hear you have to shut down based on federal guidelines or whatever, federal law, federal regulations, I don't know any business that wants to be in violation of that. And there's this kind of assumption that you have to, even if they can't really enforce it. So if you have these three things, right? If you have a stock market crash, and then they'd probably be in reverse order. So you'd have a stock market crash, a lockdown, and then a supply chain attack. And honestly, like with the supply chain attack, I think there's been this huge push for people to be weak and dependent. And that concerns me that we're supposed to be dependent on government. We're supposed to sit here and wait for our checks. We're supposed to sit here and wait for our government assistance. We're not supposed to go out and fend for ourselves and, grow our own food and, make our own living. And you have all these people in cities who just would have no idea where to start. Yeah, supply chain goes down. What do they do? So you start with a crash where, I mean, this could be a huge economic event where we're talking banks, we're talking financial institutions, we're talking government, we're talking crazy amounts of debt, we're talking inflation. The DTCC, which is the clearinghouse that was involved in all of this, they are insured for $50 trillion. Insured by who? FDIC, I don't know. But they're insured. If they have to make that claim, who pays? Who's paying $50 trillion on the claim? Is it this? Is this going to be the Federal Reserve printing money? Is it going to be our debt jumps up by 50 trillion? We're almost at 30 trillion. With the 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, we will be at 30 trillion. And then you add 50 trillion? What does that do? What does China do? What do other countries do if they see that? If they see our markets crash, what do they do? Do they switch to a different reserve currency because they no longer want to operate on the dollar if we're this chaotic? So you have a crash, you have another round of lockdowns, and then you have a supply chain attack. And those things could be enough to just completely make us a third world country, honestly. So, what do you do? It's very scary. What do you do? How do you prepare? Number one, at least, at least 2 weeks of food and water. I honestly say at least a month of food. And then if you have some water and a way to purify more, because it's hard to store a lot of water. We go through a lot of water. Water takes up a lot of space. I understand if you don't have the space. It is cheap though. Like you buy those gallon things or whatever, you get that kind of stuff. Um, it's not it's not super expensive, but if it's a matter of space, get at least several gallons of water, and then get the Sawyer mini filter or a Life Straw or something like that, a personal water filter so that you can collect water. You can collect rainwater, you can collect river or lake water and purify it, boil it, and then run it through a filter, and then you've got drinkable water. Or even those Berkey gravity fed filters or things like that. Filters that will filter out all the junk, lots of junk. So so water and a way to purify more if you have to, and I would say at least a month of food. Have a way to defend yourself, because what happens if you have food and water and supplies and you cannot defend yourself, and people realize you have food and water and supplies, even if it's just because you're not desperately scouring the stores, like you're staying in your home, they assume that you've got stuff, or they just know that you're that kind of person who would have stuff stored away. You need to be ready to defend yourself, and you need to be prepared to defend yourself against somebody who is desperate and hungry, but who, if you say, okay, yeah, sure, I can give you some food, then you've got 10 more people at your door the next day, and you cannot feed all of them. Now, in an ideal situation, and what my goal is as a prepper, is to be in a position where I do have supplies and I am in a position to give to others. That's what I want. But I know for not everybody's going to be in that situation. So I know you, and preparing to help your family, if you have not started prepping, if you have not started storing food and water, at least start with enough to feed your own family and take care of your own family. And what I would say is, even if you're literally just taking care of your own family and you feel bad because you can't help others, at the very least, when you can take care of yourself and when you can be self-reliant, then you are opening up resources for others. You are not then taking the limited resources that are available from others. So think about it that way. Take care of yourself, take care of your family. Now, if you have the means, if you have, let's say you make some money on the GameStop thing, you've got some GameStop stock. The GameStop goes way up, everything else crashes. You sell your GameStop, you got this cash. I would immediately either put it back into index funds and staple things that will be then low and then can rebuild, or put it into practical, physical, tangible things such as a house if you don't already own a home, or you want to get a piece of land or something like that, and supplies. That would be my recommendation if you see the wealth and then you're like, okay, what do I do with this if the whole market's going to fall apart? So So using that money to fortify yourself before everything. So again, we could see this kind of snowball if we already have this crash and then they have to shut down. They have to shut down because of variants or whatever, cases or hospitalizations or whatever they decide, or climate. And if they do this, and then we have a supply chain attack, the people in the big cities, the people in the big cities are screwed. Absolutely screwed. Because you have people living on top of each other, close proximity, and completely dependent on a just-in-time delivery system for food and literally pretty much everything else. You're not, nobody's in the middle of Houston, nobody's growing enough food to feed all those people. Now there's local farmers that grow a lot of food, and produce a lot of food, but they're not, again, not enough to feed all those people. They're dependent on deliveries from out of state. If that shuts down, those people are going to be starving and desperate. First, they're going to fight each other over what's remaining in the city, and then they spread out. And so if you are in a rural area, you need to also be prepared to defend yourself because eventually the herd moves in your direction. If you're in the city and you can get out, do so. Or even if it's just about making a plan to get out. If you have a place that you can go, you have a friend who lives out in the country and you've discussed this with them and you said, here, I'm willing to contribute this. I'm willing to help you out. Maybe you have supplies that you can bring with you, whatever the case may be, friend or family member, or if you can actually get your own property, whatever that may look like. But just having that plan and thinking that through and thinking about when do you get out. This is the big thing. When do you get out? Especially if it's a gradual collapse. Again, if you can get out now, get out now. It's better to be out there and set up and stable and ready to go than to, wait until the disaster happens and then start trying to be self-reliant. So it just whatever steps you can take, but most importantly, fundamentally, food and water for at least 2 weeks, preferably a month or more, and a way to defend yourself. That's what I'm looking at. So I know this is kind of a doom and gloom, but I really want everybody, I obviously have more followers on Tumblr than I do on YouTube, but I know a lot of my YouTube followers watch my YouTube stuff. And I want every single one of you to be prepared because it scares me when I see this stuff and I think about how many people are passively waiting for things to get better. And if any one of these things or all three of these things occur, a lot of people are going to be left in the lurch, and I don't want that to be you. I want you to be safe. I want you to have supplies. So I'm trying to give you this heads up that this is what I'm seeing. This is what I think might happen. Honestly, I think 2020 was just the beginning. But ultimately, to end on a happier note, at the end of the day, God is in control. Now, God has promised us that we would face difficult times. In Scripture, God promises that we will face difficult times. He never promises things are going to be nice and easy. And we've seen throughout history difficult times, collapses, crashes, all kinds of things have happened throughout history. So I'm not making any statement that God's going to snap his fingers and rescue us from tough times. But ultimately, whatever happens here, our hope, our assurance is with him, is through Jesus Christ. Our salvation, our eternal life in heaven is with him. That cannot be affected by GameStop. That cannot be affected by Bill Gates, by China. None of them can take that away from you. So at the end of the day, no matter what happens, God is in control and we have a better place waiting for us. But in the meantime, we got to be prepared because we have to understand that things will still happen and we still have to deal with those things. We still have to take care of our loved ones, and protect each other and still, be there for each other, until that time. So pray, go to church, surround yourself with good people, build community, especially if you are a Christian, build community with other Christians, help each other. If you're not a Christian, I'm just saying, take a look around. Things getting pretty bad. Think about maybe there's hope somewhere else, you know? So that's all I got for y'all today. It's a short video. I just wanted to get this out there. And I want you to be prepared. I want you to be thinking about it. But again, ultimately, when it gets to be too much, it gets to be overwhelming that you're like, this is scary. Go back to prayer, go to church. God's in control, but we still have responsibility. Like God is in control of the big picture and in control of every little thing. But we have a responsibility to our neighbors and to ourselves to be prepared. So thank you guys. I got to get going, but y'all have a great week, and I will see you. I should be live next Saturday.